At first, no one on Earth noticed anything unusual. Life went on as it always did. People went to work, children went to school, traffic filled the streets, and the evening news reported the same mix of politics, sports, and weather updates. To the human eye, nothing had changed. But high above the clouds, far beyond the range of ordinary telescopes, something new had arrived. The watchers came silently, drifting into the shadow of Earth like shadows themselves. They were not reckless. They did not rush in with warships, blazing or loud declarations. Instead, they observed. To them, this was standard procedure. A new world was always to be studied first, measured, and analyzed. They had done this many times before, across countless star systems. And in every case, they believed they already knew what they would find. Earth was no exception. From a distance, the planet looked divided and fragile. Alien probes intercepted human broadcasts, news channels, and radio chatter. What they heard convinced them that humanity was a fractured species, endlessly arguing, endlessly fighting. They saw the endless cycle of conflict, the hunger, the inequality. To their eyes, this was not a strong world. This was a planet ripe for conquest. Night after night, their ships floated in silence, hidden by advanced cloaking fields. They passed above cities without being seen, recording every signal, every image. They studied military satellites, scanning the weapons pointed into space. What they saw made them laugh among themselves. Crude rockets, slow machines, primitive missiles. Nothing that could stop even one of their smallest ships, and so they grew confident. But what the watchers did not understand was that their silent arrival had not gone entirely unnoticed. On the ground, a handful of scientists in remote observatories saw strange anomalies. Small distortions in the patterns of stars, odd flickers on their instruments, data that didn't quite make sense. At first, they dismissed it as a fault in their systems. But the anomalies grew more frequent. Some dared whisper about visitors. Most stayed silent, afraid of being laughed at. Still, in those quiet hours of night when the sky was clear, a few people knew something was happening. They just didn't know what. Meanwhile, in the vastness above, the Alien Council debated their next steps. They argued over the most efficient way to take Earth. Should they reveal themselves with a show of force, demanding surrender? Or should they simply strike, disabling Earth's power grids and armies in one swift move? The arrogance in their voices was clear. To them, this was not a question of if they could win, but only how quickly. They did not even consider the possibility of resistance, but in their arrogance, they missed small details. They underestimated the way humans adapt. They misread the way Earth's divisions could vanish when threatened. They failed to see that. While humanity argued, disagreed, and sometimes fought among themselves, they were also capable of standing together when survival was at stake. For weeks, the silent arrival continued. Alien drones drifted through the upper atmosphere, invisible to radar. They scanned oceans, mountains, cities, and deserts. They recorded languages and culture, believing they were learning everything they needed to know. But for all their technology, they could not measure something deeper, the resilience of the human spirit. On the ground, life went on. A fisherman in a small village cast his net without knowing a silent machine floated above, watching him. A teacher in a crowded classroom explained a history lesson, unaware that her voice was being recorded by ears not of this earth. A soldier stood guard at a lonely outpost, not knowing that alien eyes looked down on his weapon and laughed. Earths. People lived in innocence, unaware of the storm that was forming just beyond the sky, and yet a strange tension began to ripple. Animals sensed what humans could not. Birds changed their flight paths. Dogs barked into the night at things unseen. Sensitive instruments picked up frequencies that had no source. Radio operators heard whispers of static that did not belong to any human transmission. A sense of being watched spread quietly, without proof, but strong enough to stir unease in those who trusted their instincts. The Watchers noted all this, but dismissed it as unimportant. To them, these were primitive reactions of a lesser species. They did not realize that small signs can often grow into warnings, and warnings into action. As the days passed, the alien fleet expanded. More ships arrived, slipping into orbit one by one. To anyone on Earth who might have noticed, it would have seemed like a growing shadow covering the stars. But still, humanity looked up at the night sky without knowing what hovered there. Inside the alien ships, commanders prepared their reports. "The species is fractured," one said. "Their weapons are outdated," said another. "Their governments cannot unite. They will not resist long." They wrote their words with certainty, not understanding how false they were, because what they could not measure was the invisible thread that tied humans together. They could not see the way families stood for one another, the way strangers helped each other in times of disaster, the way entire cities could rise from rubble stronger than before. They saw arguments on television, but did not see the quiet kindness in daily life. They saw wars in history books, but did not see the endless recoveries that followed, and so, in their blindness, they prepared for an easy conquest. But Earth was not as defenseless as it seemed. In a remote lab, a group of scientists finally gathered enough strange data to take seriously. Their instruments picked up unusual disturbances, as though something large were bending space above them. They sent reports to higher authorities, who ignored them at first. But whispers began to spread among the scientific community. Something was in orbit, something not human. Still, the world did not know. Families cooked dinner, workers returned home, children played in the streets, and far above, the silent watchers tightened their grip, believing the moment of conquest was close. They thought they had seen everything. They thought they understood humanity. But what they failed to notice, hidden in plain sight, was the quiet strength of an entire species that had survived famine, war, disaster, and endless challenges. A strength that could not be measured in weapons or armies. The silent arrival was not the beginning of conquest. It was the beginning of a mistake, one that would teach the galaxy why Earth, though seemingly defenseless, was far from weak. And as the Watchers made their final plans, humanity carried on, unaware that the eyes of strangers were upon them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What those strangers did not know was that the perfect moment would never come. Because the story of Earth was never about easy conquest. It was about what happens when ordinary people face impossible odds. And soon, the Watchers would learn that silence could not hide them forever. The silent days could not last forever. For weeks, the Watchers had hidden in the dark, observing, learning, and planning, but patience only made their ambition stronger. Eventually, they decided it was time. The first move had to be made. It began quietly, as many great shifts in history do. No explosions, no sudden flashes in the sky. Instead, it started with things that seemed small. Power grids flickered. Satellites lost signal for minutes at a time. Radio frequencies became filled with strange interference. Engineers on Earth rushed to find explanations, blaming technical faults, aging equipment, or solar storms. But none of their reports could explain why the problems always seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. What humans didn't know was that these were tests. The alien fleet was probing the planet's defenses, pushing at its edges, seeing how Earth would react. To them, it was like tapping the walls of a fortress to find the weakest stones. From their vantage point above, the Watchers monitored every response. When satellites went down, they observed how quickly technicians restored them. When power grids flickered, they measured the backup systems that came online. When radio interference spread, they listened to how military forces communicated. During the blackout, every detail was studied, cataloged, and analyzed. The aliens grew more confident with every test. "They are slower than we imagined," one commander wrote in his report. "Their systems are fragile, their networks disorganized. This planet will fall with minimal resistance." But they missed something crucial. While governments were slow to connect the dots, ordinary people noticed. Farmers looked at the sky when their radios cut out and felt uneasy. Pilots muttered to each other about strange malfunctions. Amateur astronomers reported unusual objects moving against the stars. The information did not spread widely, but the seeds of awareness were being planted. The aliens decided it was time to push harder. One evening, over a major city, the sky rippled faintly. Most people didn't notice. They were busy with their lives, eating dinner, watching television, talking with family. But in the quiet hours after midnight, a group of security staff at an observatory caught a glimpse of something vast moving against the stars. At first, they thought it was a trick of the eye, maybe even a cloud passing across the moonlight. But the object blocked too much. It was too sharp, too deliberate. They watched in stunned silence as a shape larger than any airplane slid across the night sky, leaving no sound, no trace, only a cold shadow. And then it was gone. The next morning, whispers began. Reports surfaced of strange lights and unidentified craft. Some dismissed them as rumors. Others laughed them off as weather balloons or satellites. But deep down, a quiet sense of unease began to spread. The first move was not just technological, it was psychological. The watchers wanted humanity to feel small, uncertain, and powerless. They wanted whispers to grow into fear, so when the time came to reveal themselves, resistance would already be weakened. So the probes went lower. Over oceans, fishermen saw strange glows beneath the waves. In deserts, caravans glimpsed shadows, moving against the stars. In cities, street cameras recorded brief flashes of objects darting faster than any jet. And yet, no proof lasted long. Every piece of evidence seemed to vanish: corrupted files, erased data, power surges that wiped recordings. Clean. For ordinary people, it felt like chasing ghosts. But for a small circle of scientists and defense experts, the pattern was becoming clear. Something was testing Earth. Something beyond human technology. They sent urgent messages to leaders, warning that what they faced might not be natural. Still, politicians hesitated. Few wanted to admit the unthinkable. To acknowledge it would mean facing it. Meanwhile, in orbit, the alien commanders believed everything was unfolding perfectly. "They are divided," they told themselves. "They doubt their own eyes. They fight among themselves about what is real. Soon they will be too paralyzed to resist." So the watchers escalated again. This time, they chose a demonstration, far. From any human city, in the middle of a remote ocean, a storm formed without warning. At first, sailors thought it was a sudden squall, the kind that sometimes rises from calm waters. But this storm was different. It grew too quickly, with winds too strong, waves too high. Instruments on ships went wild, compasses spinning uselessly. And in the center of the storm, hidden beneath lightning and rain, a massive shape hovered, silently. From orbit, the alien fleet watched the chaos unfold. They measured how quickly distress calls went out, how governments responded, how rescue teams mobilized. To them, it was a game of statistics, a test of human reaction speed. But to the humans caught in it, it was real. Families huddled below deck as waves crashed against their ships. Pilots fought to keep their planes steady as winds tore at their wings. Radio operators called desperately for help, voices filled with fear. And all the while, the unseen watchers took notes. When the storm ended as suddenly as it had begun, it left confusion in its wake. Survivors spoke of unnatural lightning, of skies that bent and twisted, of shadows too large to belong to any human craft. The official explanations called it a rare weather phenomenon. Many believed it, many didn't. The aliens believed their plan was working. But what they didn't realize was that their first moves were not just testing Earth, they were awakening it. The strange events began to connect in people's minds. Across countries and cultures, ordinary citizens felt something bigger was happening. Conversations whispered in quiet corners. News outlets cautiously reported unexplained incidents. Amateur footage leaked onto the internet before it could be erased. The watchers had meant to instill fear. Instead, they had sparked curiosity. Humans were beginning to look up. And once humanity starts looking, it rarely stops. Inside secret meetings, military leaders began taking the warnings seriously. Plans were drafted quietly, defenses checked, strategies whispered. They knew their weapons might not be enough, but humans had always survived by preparing, by adapting, by refusing to surrender even against overwhelming odds. The first move was meant to weaken Earth, but in truth, it had begun to unite it. Still, the aliens did not see this. Their reports continued to paint a picture of weakness. They believed that fear was spreading faster than resolve. They congratulated themselves on their flawless strategy, unaware that their arrogance was planting the seeds of their own downfall. And so the first move ended much like it began, in silence. The watchers returned to their cloaked positions, convinced they had the advantage. On Earth, life appeared normal once again. People still went to work, children still played, the world still spun. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. A quiet awareness had spread across humanity. The feeling of being watched had become too strong to ignore. Leaders began whispering about possibilities they once dismissed. Scientists shared data they had once hidden. And ordinary people looked at the night sky not with ignorance, but with a new sense of caution. The game had truly begun. And though the watchers believed they were still in control, they had underestimated their opponent. The first move had been theirs, but the next would belong to Earth. For weeks, the signs had been growing stronger. Flickering satellites, sudden power failures, unexplained storms, and strange shadows passing across the night sky. At first, humanity reacted the way it always did, with confusion, denial, and arguments. Governments hesitated to admit what they could not explain, while the public debated whether these incidents were tricks, natural disasters, or something else. But doubt could not last forever. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to sink in. Something was here. Something was watching. And it was not of this world. At first, fear spread quietly. People avoided talking about it too loudly, as if saying it aloud would make it real. But fear was only the beginning. Humanity had never been a species that stayed down for long. The same stubbornness that had carried people through wars, disasters, and hardships now began to stir again. Fear turned to questions. Questions turned to determination. And determination began to form into resistance. It did not start with governments or armies. It began with ordinary people. Farmers who had seen strange lights over their fields told their neighbors. Fishermen who had watched glowing shapes beneath the water shared their stories. Amateur astronomers compared their star charts and discovered movements no telescope could explain. The pieces started to connect. Humanity, scattered and diverse, began to wake up. In basements, garages, and quiet corners of the internet, small groups formed. They weren't soldiers, but they were thinkers, engineers, and dreamers. They collected data, traded recordings, and built networks of information. Where official sources remained silent, these groups filled the gaps. People who had never met before found themselves united by a single purpose: to understand what was happening and how to face it. Meanwhile, within military bases and government halls, the silence was finally breaking. Reports that had once been dismissed were now being read carefully. Files once buried in archives were dusted off. Leaders who had ignored early warnings now demanded answers. Plans began to form, some practical, others desperate. No one truly knew what humanity was facing, but one thing was certain: Earth could not afford to wait. The aliens, watching from above, continued to believe their strategy was working. They thought their shadow games had made humanity too divided, too scared to act. But what they didn't understand was the resilience of human nature. Pressure that should have broken humanity was instead forging unity. Resistance was awakening. It showed itself first in small acts. Engineers designed new shielding for satellites, quietly reinforcing systems against interference. Scientists who had once worked in separate fields came together, combining physics, astronomy, and computer science to decode strange signals from the skies. Radio operators stayed awake through the night, listening for frequencies that didn't belong to Earth. Farmers pointed cameras at the stars. Students built drones to track unusual movements in the sky. Every act, no matter how small, was a spark. And sparks have a way of spreading. News outlets, once cautious, began to report more boldly. Documentaries explored the unexplained events. Interviews featured eyewitnesses who refused to be silenced. Though officials tried to downplay it, the global population was listening. The question was no longer, is something out there, but rather, what do we do when it comes? The answer, as it always had been for humanity, was fight back. But fighting didn't only mean weapons. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its guns or machines. It had been its mind, its ability to adapt, to improvise, to find solutions where none seemed possible. That strength was beginning to rise now. In hidden labs, researchers experimented with frequencies to jam the strange interference. In military bases, old strategies were rewritten to account for enemies that could move silently through the sky. In universities, students debated what an alien intelligence might want and how to outthink it. Resistance was not about who had the biggest weapon. It was about refusing to surrender, about refusing to believe that Earth was as defenseless as it seemed. The aliens, however, pushed harder. More storms appeared in oceans. More satellites went dark. More shadows crossed the skies of major cities. They wanted to see panic spread, wanted humanity to collapse before the true invasion began. But instead, every new move only confirmed what people already suspected. The truth was undeniable now. There were others out there. They were watching. And they were preparing for something far greater than observation. Across the world, people began to unite. Nations that had once mistrusted each other sat at the same table, quietly sharing intelligence. Scientists across borders exchanged data without hesitation. Even ordinary people felt a strange sense of connection, as if the old divisions of country, race, and belief mattered less when facing something that threatened all of humanity. Resistance was not just military, it was human. Stories began to spread of courage in the face of the unknown. A group of sailors who stood their ground in a storm, refusing to abandon their ship even when strange lights circled beneath the waves. A radio technician who refused to sleep, logging every strange transmission night after night. A teacher who told her students, "Remember, no matter what happens, we are not powerless." These small stories mattered because they reminded humanity of something the aliens could never understand: the strength of hope. Meanwhile, in space, the Watchers grew restless. Their reports still described humanity as weak, but some began to notice signs they hadn't expected. Faster responses to disruptions. Satellites coming back online sooner than before. Communications networks rerouting around interference in ways that suggested planning, not panic. The aliens debated among themselves. Some argued that Earth was waking up faster than predicted. Others dismissed it as coincidence. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. On Earth, however, there was no doubt anymore. Resistance had truly awakened. It was not perfect, it was not fully prepared, but it was alive, and that was all humanity needed. History had shown that humanity rarely won its battles by being stronger. It won by being relentless, by refusing to quit even when the odds were impossible. The same pattern was beginning to repeat. Resistance did not look like shiny fleets or powerful weapons. It looked like a world that refused to bow. In small towns, people gathered at night to watch the skies. In cities, scientists worked through sleepless nights, building devices they weren't sure would work. In military bases, soldiers stood ready, unsure of what they might face, but unwilling to step aside. In homes, parents comforted their children, teaching them not to be afraid of the dark sky, but to stand tall beneath it. The aliens believed they were shaping the battlefield, but what they had really done was awaken a force they could never fully measure. That force was not a machine, not a weapon, not a fleet. It was the human spirit. The first spark of resistance had been lit, and once lit, it could not be extinguished. The Watchers still believed they held the upper hand. They thought humanity was fragile. They thought fear would paralyze the planet. But in their arrogance, they had overlooked the truth. Fear was only the beginning. From fear came courage. From confusion came unity. From weakness came strength. Resistance had awakened, and it would not go back to sleep. The world was no longer the same. Humanity had seen the shadows above, had felt the weight of being watched, and instead of breaking, it had risen. Whatever came next, Earth would not face it in silence. It would resist, and that resistance would change everything. The days of silence were over. Humanity had reached a moment where fear and hesitation could no longer guide its steps. For too long, people had lived under the shadows in the sky, waiting for something to happen, waiting for someone else to act. But now the time for waiting was gone. This was the turning point. The first sparks of resistance had already been lit, but now those sparks were catching fire. In small communities and large cities alike, people were beginning to realize they were no longer helpless witnesses. They were participants in something bigger than themselves. What had once felt like a distant mystery had become part of daily life. Strange movements in the sky were no longer just rumors but warnings. Faint signals on radios were no longer dismissed as static, but studied as messages. Humanity's eyes were wide open, and for the first time, they were staring directly into the unknown without flinching. Governments could no longer ignore the truth either. Where once they had covered up reports and dismissed questions, now they were forced to act. Meetings were held in secret halls. Leaders sat across from one another with maps spread before them, and intelligence reports were no longer shuffled into dusty folders. They were read with urgency. The silence of authority had broken. The world's leaders understood. Humanity was no longer preparing for if, but for when. But the turning point was not just about politics or armies. It was about the people. Ordinary men, women, and children began to carry themselves differently. There was fear still, of course, but it was no longer the kind of fear that froze them in place. It was the kind of fear that made them sharper, stronger, more determined. People began to share information more openly, to help neighbors, to plan escape routes or defenses in case the unthinkable happened. A strange but powerful unity had taken root. The aliens, watching from the skies, had no idea this shift was happening. In their calculations, Earth was still fragile, unprepared, divided. They believed their subtle attacks, disrupted satellites, weather manipulation, strange appearances, were breaking humanity's spirit. What they could not see was that their very actions had pushed humanity past its breaking point and into something entirely new: defiance. This was the moment when everything began to change. It started with small victories, the kind that outsiders might not even notice. A satellite that had gone dark suddenly came back online thanks to improvised human ingenuity. A strange signal was not just recorded, but partially decoded by a group of university students working through the night. A drone captured the clearest image yet of one of the mysterious crafts, and instead of hiding it, people shared it openly. Every small win added up, not just in knowledge, but in spirit. And then came the first real confrontation. It wasn't a battle in the traditional sense. No missiles were fired, no armies clashed. Instead, it was a contest of willpower, a silent test of strength between watchers in the sky and humans on the ground. The aliens sent another wave of interference, aiming to knock out Earth's communication networks completely. But this time, the response was different. Teams of scientists and engineers, scattered across the globe but working in contact, had built countermeasures. Instead of chaos, the networks flickered, struggled, and then held. For the first time, humanity had not just endured, but resisted. The victory was small, almost invisible to most people who didn't understand the technology, but its meaning was enormous. The Watchers had expected silence, collapse, and panic. Instead, they faced resistance. Humanity had sent its first message back, not through words, but through action. We will not be broken. That moment became the true turning point. It spread through communities like wildfire. News outlets reported the event. Scientists explained it in simple terms, and even those who didn't understand the technical details understood what it meant. Humanity had stood its ground. The aliens did not retreat, but they hesitated. For the first time, they questioned their assumptions. Their records had painted Earth as a fractured world, a place where nations distrusted one another, where people fought more among themselves than against outside threats. But what they were seeing now did not match those records. Instead of collapsing, Earth was rising. On the ground, people felt the shift too. Where once conversations had been filled with worry, they now carried a quiet confidence. Where once the night sky brought dread, it now sparked determination. People began preparing, not just emotionally, but physically. Farmers fortified their land. Fishermen adapted their boats for scouting. City dwellers organized watch groups. Not all preparations were practical, but the spirit behind them mattered more than the details. In every corner of the world, a new kind of awareness was spreading. Humanity was not as defenseless as it had once seemed. The turning point wasn't about overwhelming power. It wasn't about suddenly having stronger weapons than the Watchers. It was about the shift in belief. For the first time since the silent arrival, humanity believed it could stand a chance. That belief alone changed everything. The Watchers, frustrated, pushed harder. Strange lights appeared over oceans. Unexplained storms battered coastal towns. More satellites were targeted. But each act of aggression only fed the fire. Every attack confirmed to humanity what they already knew. The enemy was real, and it could be resisted. People no longer asked, "What are they?" or "Why are they here?" They asked, "What can we do next?" And that question marked the true turning point. Humanity had shifted from being a species that waited to one that acted. They were no longer passengers on a planet under threat. They were becoming fighters, planners, survivors. For the first time, even the aliens realized this was not going to be the swift, effortless conquest they had imagined. They had underestimated Earth, not because of its weapons or armies, but because of something they could not measure, the unyielding spirit of its people. In homes, families told their children stories of resilience, reminding them that no force in history had ever truly broken humanity. In classrooms, teachers turned lessons into discussions about survival, unity, and creativity. In laboratories, researchers refused to sleep, driven by the urgency of the unknown. In military bases, soldiers trained not just for battle, but for adaptation, because no one knew what the real fight would look like. Everywhere, people carried themselves with a new kind of determination. Humanity had not won the war, not yet, but it had won something equally important: belief in its own strength. The turning point was not a single event, but a collection of choices, actions, and awakenings. Humanity had crossed an invisible line. They would never again see themselves as helpless under the stars. Now, they saw themselves as guardians of their own world, And the watchers above, for the first time, felt the weight of uncertainty. They realized the mistake they had made. They had thought of Earth as prey, but what they were beginning to see was something far more dangerous, a world that refused to kneel. The future battles were still ahead. The challenges would only grow harder. But this moment, the turning point, had ensured one thing: humanity would not face the storm with fear alone. They would face it with unity, courage, and the quiet but unshakable belief that they could endure. The night sky still held shadows, but now, beneath it, humanity stood taller than ever before. The sky had grown restless. For weeks, the watchers had tested Earth with small strikes, strange weather patterns, flashes of light, disappearing signals, but humanity had not bent. They had expected fear to spread, for panic to break apart societies. Instead, the opposite had happened. The world had come alive with unity, determination, and resilience. Still, no one could deny the looming danger. Humanity had grown stronger, yes, but the watchers above were ancient and powerful. Their technology stretched far beyond anything on Earth. If they truly chose to unleash their might, the planet would have little chance of surviving. That truth weighed on every mind, even as courage carried people forward. Everyone wondered the same question: what hope do we really have? And then slowly, the answer began to reveal itself. It did not come from a government meeting, a secret lab, or a hidden weapon. It came from the people themselves. The so-called secret power had been with humanity all along, unnoticed, unmeasured, unvalued by those who thought only in terms of machines and armies. It was not a weapon of steel or fire. It was not a code hidden in satellites or a miracle discovery in some experiment. It was something far more ordinary, yet infinitely stronger. The secret power was humanity itself. The Watchers had calculated every advantage they held: speed, weapons, stealth, control over the skies. They had measured Earth's armies, technology, and resources, and found them lacking. But what they had never measured, what they had never even thought to measure, was the resilience of human beings. Every challenge thrown at them, every shadow in the night sky, had not weakened humanity, but strengthened it. People who once argued over differences now stood shoulder to shoulder. Communities that had once been divided by distance or language now shared knowledge and support. Fear had not splintered them, it had bound them together. And in that unity lay a power greater than any machine. The Watchers realized this too late. When another massive wave of interference struck, something unexpected happened. Instead of panic, people adapted within minutes. When power grids faltered, neighbors lit up the dark with their own improvised solutions. When signals dropped, humans turned to older methods of communication: runners, written notes, simple, flags on rooftops. The Watchers had believed that by striking technology they would paralyze Earth. Instead, they awakened something older, deeper, unbreakable. Humanity had always been a species of survivors, and survivors always find a way. The secret power became clearer with each passing day. It was not just unity, it was creativity. Humans refused to follow only one path. For every problem, they found 10 different answers. A farmer might build defenses from scrap metal. A student might design a new code for hidden communication. A group of children might turn a game into a way of spotting unusual lights in the sky. This endless creativity was something the Watchers could not understand. Their strength lay in their precision, their flawless calculations. Humanity's strength lay in its ability to adapt, to bend without breaking, to improvise. And then came the moment when the secret power was no longer just a quiet force, but an undeniable reality. One night, the Watchers attempted their boldest strike yet. Great ships, cloaked in shadows, descended lower than ever before. Their presence could no longer be mistaken for stars or storms. For the first time, millions of people looked up and saw them clearly. The world seemed to hold its breath. Fear should have broken out. Panic should have torn apart the streets. But something else happened. People did not run. They stood. In villages, in towns, in cities, people gathered together and faced the sky. Some held torches, others banged drums, some raised their voices, in chants, songs, and shouts. Across the planet, humanity responded not with weapons, but with presence, with unity. It was as if the whole earth was speaking with one voice. We are here, and we will not bow. The watchers, so used to silence and submission, froze. They had seen civilizations collapse under far less pressure. Yet here stood a world that refused to collapse at all. The power they faced was not technological, it was spiritual, emotional, unquantifiable. It was the will of an entire planet refusing to surrender. The revelation shook the watchers to their core. They understood, finally, why Earth had always been left untouched. Other species they had conquered were advanced, but predictable. They relied fully on their machines, their systems, their leaders. When those were broken, the species broke with them. But humans were different. Break their machines, and they adapt. Break their systems, and they invent new ones. Break their spirit, and they only grow stronger. This was the secret power of defenseless Earth. It wasn't hidden armies or secret weapons. It wasn't a miracle invention or divine protection. It was the ordinary people themselves, resilient, united, endlessly creative, and unwilling to let go of hope. As the watchers hovered in the sky, faced with this unshakable truth, they hesitated. Their great advantage was slipping away. For conquest to succeed, fear had to rule. But here, fear had turned into strength. The moment they unleashed open war, they knew they would not just be fighting soldiers or governments, they would be fighting every human being, every mind, every heart. And that was a battle they could never truly win. On the ground, people sensed it too. They did not know if the watchers would retreat or attack, but they knew something had shifted. For the first time, they did not feel like prey staring at hunters. They felt like guardians of a world worth defending, armed with something no weapon could match, the will to endure. Days passed, and slowly the watchers pulled back. The lights in the sky grew fewer, the strange signals weaker. It was not victory. In the traditional sense, no enemy ship had been destroyed, no territory reclaimed. But it was a victory of a different kind, a victory that mattered even more. Humanity had shown that it could not be broken. The secret power revealed itself not in a single act, but in millions of small acts across the world. A family sharing food with strangers. A group of scientists refusing to give up on their research. Children drawing pictures of Earth standing tall against the stars. Farmers teaching one another how to protect their lands. These were not weapons, but they were stronger than weapons. And so, the lesson was clear, not just for the watchers, but for humanity itself. The greatest strength of Earth was not its machines or its armies. It was its people. The power that made Earth untouchable was the power of resilience, unity, and hope. As the skies slowly returned to silence, people carried this truth with them. Life resumed, fields were planted, schools reopened, laughter returned to streets. But something had changed forever. Humanity now knew that it was not defenseless at all. It carried within it a secret power that no conqueror could ever steal, and the watchers, drifting far above, would never forget. They had come expecting an easy conquest, but they had encountered something beyond their comprehension. They had discovered why Earth remained free when so many others had fallen. It was not because Earth was hidden, or weak, or ignored. It was because Earth held within it the most dangerous power of all, a species that refuses to surrender. The secret was revealed, and with it came a promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how many shadows gathered in the sky, Earth would endure. Its people would endure. And for the first time, the universe itself seemed to understand. This defenseless planet was anything but.